Imagine waking up tomorrow morning and discovering that every building on Earth had vanished. No houses, no heaters, no insulation, just an endless, howling void. The kind of cold that doesn't just make you shiver, it hunts you. It seeks the heat in your blood until it stops your heart before the sun even touches the horizon. For most of us, this is the end, the final chapter. But for our ancestors, this was just another day in the Ice Age. We've been sold a lie for generations. We've been fed a story that our ancestors were primitive, trembling animals hiding in damp, dark caves just waiting for the sun to save them. But the truth found in history is much louder and far more inspiring. They weren't helpless victims of a harsh climate. They were the first real builders of our species. When the ancient world turned into an unstoppable sheet of ice, they didn't just huddle together and die. They leveled up. They looked at the frozen, unforgiving ground and saw a blueprint. They realized that the Earth itself was a giant battery of heat, keeping a stable temperature just a few feet beneath the deadly frost. Armed with nothing but carved horns and the broad shoulder bones of large animals to use as shovels, they started digging. They didn't just find natural shelters, they carefully designed them. They dug deep, perfectly round pits. To keep the dampness out, they lined the dirt walls with branches of sticky, resin-soaked wood. Over this, they placed thick, warm fur from reindeer and bears, creating the world's first heavily insulated underground bunkers. They naturally understood how to manage heat and block cold drafts long before those ideas had science book names. They weren't running from the cold, they were smartly outsmarting it, one shovel full of dirt at a time. But as the Ice Age deepened and the massive ice sheets pushed further south, the ground alone wasn't enough to save them. The environment shifted, and our ancestors had to adapt to new lands. They moved into the vast, treeless plains, a brutal, flat landscape where wood was impossible to find and razor-sharp winds could freeze a person in seconds. How do you build a home in a flat, empty graveyard of ice? You look to the giants. You look at the mammoth. To any other animal, a giant woolly mammoth was just a large meal. To our ancestors, it was the perfect building material. This is where true architecture was born. They didn't have steel. They didn't have machines or cranes, but they had incredible teamwork and vision. Using raw muscle, they dragged huge, heavy mammoth skulls, each weighing up to 400 pounds, to their camp. They used these massive skulls as base foundations, burying the heavy tusks deep into the frozen ground to safely anchor their homes against winds that could blow a grown man away. Next came the mainframe. They took the massive, curved mammoth ribs, nature's own perfectly shaped arches, and locked them together to create a strong, rounded dome. They tied these bones together using braided animal string, sinew. By soaking the string first, they made sure that as it dried in the freezing air, it would shrink and lock the bones together as tightly as modern cables. They carefully spaced these ribs in a perfect circle so the heavy winter snows wouldn't crush the roof. Over this bone frame, they placed layer upon layer of thick mammoth hides that had been cleaned and smoked to keep water out. They overlapped these heavy skins like tiles on a modern roof so melting snow would slide right off. Most importantly, they mastered how to safely control the air inside. They created neat, adjustable holes at the very top of the tent. This allowed the dangerous, deadly smoke from their fires to safely float out, while the warm, dry heat stayed trapped near the ground where they slept. They weren't just surviving the ice, they were beating it. As human families grew and traveled across different parts of the world, their building styles exploded into a beautiful variety of designs. They weren't just building by basic instinct anymore, they were experimenting with whatever materials they could find. The stone fortresses. In the rocky, stormy north, where rough stones were the only thing available, they learned the difficult skill of dry stone building. Without using any mud or cement, they stacked heavy rocks in perfect, self-supporting circles. They used gravity to create walls so thick and solid that no blizzard or wild animal could break through. It was the birth of the fortress, the first mud bricks. In the wet, muddy river valleys, they turned weak dirt and thin branches into hard, safe shelters. Through trial and error, they realized that wet mud alone would crack and fall apart when it froze. But if they mixed that wet mud with tough mammoth hair and dry grass, they created a very strong material. The hair stopped it from cracking, and the mud made it hard. When this mixture dried in the biting cold, it became as tough as a rock. These were the early versions of the mud brick homes that people still use in extreme weather today. The ice armor, and then there was the ice itself. In the absolute coldest parts of the world, they stopped fighting the freezing weather and turned it into a helpful tool. They cut neat, square blocks of hard-packed snow, locking them together in a dome shape that survived the worst winter storms. They figured out that packed snow is actually full of tiny air bubbles. Because of this, a wall of snow acts exactly like a giant thermos, keeping the cold out and the heat in. They even lit a brief hot fire inside to slightly melt the walls. When the walls quickly froze again, they turned into a smooth layer of solid ice that stopped cold winds and reflected body heat back into the room. It was the ultimate irony. The very cold that was trying to kill them became their strongest shield. Every single one of these unique homes proved that the ancient human brain was highly intelligent, awake, and completely ready to conquer the planet. Then comes the moment that changed our story forever. The storm is still raging outside. You can hear the wind screaming against the heavy animal skins, but inside, the feeling is totally different. The fire is glowing a warm, comforting orange against the tall bone walls. The air is dry and smells like wood smoke and safety. For the first time in human history, the deep panic is gone. They aren't lying awake, worried about surviving until morning. They have finally achieved something they've never had before: time. In the soft, golden light of the fire, a huge shift happens in their minds. The tired hunter has the safety to become an artist. The mother has the energy to become a storyteller. Because the cold is locked outside, they aren't just surviving anymore. They are dreaming. Using sharp stones, they carve beautiful tiny figures out of mammoth teeth, making delicate lines to show faces and clothing. They use natural colors to paint the amazing history of their family on the walls of their caves. They start to invent magical stories to explain the stars in the sky, the sound of the wind, and the scary things in the dark. They aren't just cavemen living in the dirt. They are the early creators of the human soul. They invented language, art, music, and deep thinking around the warm fires of their bone houses. They didn't just survive the endless winter. They built the foundation of everything we have today. They didn't just build a shelter, they built humanity.